So with the addition of Terror Zones and Sunder Charms in patch 2.5 for Diablo 2 Resurrected, we saw a massive bump in the damage output for elemental builds, physical damage builds got a little bit shafted, and magic damage builds basically got nothing at all. With all of that in mind, I want to take a look at the assassin builds and how they now stack up in the endgame farming meta. Overall, a thing to understand about the assassin is that the elemental traps that she has access to, the ones that you actually set, do not gain any sources of minus enemy resistance other than auras, curses, and while they do work with the Sunder Charms, there's no way on your gear without stuff like Infinity or Plague to actually bump up their damage. So with that in mind, the overall takeaway from the assassin is that while a lot of her builds became a bit better to pilot, her overall scale of power against other builds had actually gone down pretty drastically. Starting in the D tier, we have Blade Assassin, Whirlwind Assassin, and Riftson. Blade Fear and Whirlwind are both going to be using a physical Sunder Charm because it's both going to increase Death Sentry damage against immunes, as well as increase their damage output on their primary skills, but this still doesn't really do much to elevate them. And then something like Riftson actually does pretty well with a Sunder Charm, but since you don't have any other way of really buffing up the damage, it's still mostly a meme. Then in the C tier, we have Phoenix Strike Assassin, which if anybody could figure out how to play it would probably do much better. In all sincerity, Phoenix Strike is just still too clunky to really bring out a lot of the strength of the build, and sadly, minus enemy resistance and the Sunder Charm are not necessarily going to work in the ways that you expect them to on all of the different procs of the different skills that you would use on Phoenix Strike. In the B tier, Dragon Talon remains mostly unchanged, and while Wake of Fire's efficiency on Death Sentry and Fire Blast are like pretty noticeably increased by a Sunder Charm, overall its power level hasn't changed too drastically, so they both still end up in the B tier. The big change here is that while Fire Blast was firmly in the A tier, Lightning Sentry was previously considered to be an S tier endgame farming strategy since you had access to 3 different damage types, a version of Corpse Explosion, and great mobility even without teleport. But compared to the rest of the elemental builds, especially lightning damage builds, she gained almost nothing in comparison to the other ones. So that's why nowadays in the endgame meta, Lightning Sentry actually drops down to the A tier. What this does mean is at this point, we don't consider any of the assassin builds to be considered S tier builds. And while I think people have a lot of opinions about what builds need what to become stronger, overall, I think that Trapson and Martial Arts Assassin needs to be revisited in some way, because overall, the Assassin's endgame farming strategies are almost too niche at this point. If you played any of the assassin builds this season, especially with Sunder Charms and Terror Zones, let me know what you think. As another quick aside, Lightning Sentry still does really well when we're talking about progressing to the endgame. Having access to 3 different damage types does mean that she can effectively farm in any zone, as long as the player count is low enough, which does mean she gains access to a ton of the Terror Zones with a decent amount of efficiency. But it's really in that endgame farming consideration where her power scale falls off so drastically compared to the rest that continue to scale up with an increase in gear, that I think is really the hallmark of some of the wins as well as losses with the implementation of Sunder Charms and Terror Zones in Season 2. Thank you so much for watching this video, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one.